So I'm going to do a very rapid overview of 6 years of work. So hang on to your hats. So I've been working in reduced tillage systems for vegetables. Got really interested in this based on some feedback from growers that felt that we really had to address issues of soil quality and vegetable production systems. And so a lot of the work, I'm just putting the arm up here, is really focused, and the measures we do are around soil health, soil quality, and nutrient release in these different systems. But the reason that we go to reduced tillage is our focus is soil health. So we can enhance soil quality by not doing a lot of moldboard plowing, and so we're not adding a lot of oxygen to the soil, so it's not mineralizing as much organic matter. We want to conserve soil moisture. By not flipping the soil, we maintain our pore structure and reduce erosion. And then the other part is that if we're not plowing, we're not recruiting weed seeds to the surface, so hopefully we're affecting the weed populations in season. But the one thing about going to reduced tillage is that you do actually see a shift in the weed populations from annuals to perennials. So our management ends up having to change. Our focus has been dealing with compaction on our really highly productive vegetable fields. They have been farmed intensively for many years with heavy equipment. And growers went through all sorts of fertility treatments and using all sorts of different plant conditioners and hormones and couldn't get any benefit. And finally we started looking at compaction, and that was where the issue was. And so we knew we had to remediate that, and this tillage strategy that we're using really does a good job of dealing with compaction. But other benefits or goals that we have is to try to improve our weed control and reduce fuel use and costs by reducing the number of passes in any particular season from 2 to 3 with plowing, disking, fitting once or twice to 1 pass prior to planting. So that provides, especially for many of the growers, they say the most important benefit they've seen has been labor efficiency early in the season. So that means that they can go out and they can fit a field up, do all of that in 1 pass and get onto tasks that are more economically beneficial to the farm. Timely planting, doing other kind of management skills. And that's a hard to measure benefit of these systems. It's really hard to measure efficiency. We can measure number of labor hours and we can show reduced cost, but flexibility is hard to actually quantify. So in our assessments of all of these, our main thing is try to maintain yields. Now there's different ways to think about reducing tillage, and so we have those that are a whole system sort of redesign where you might look at the way that you're managing beds or cover crops. You can look at changing the equipment that you're using so that you're actually changing the way in which you apply primary tillage. Then you can look at rotations over time and change the way in which you're actually applying tillage over the whole field, whether or not you're moldboard plowing or using any of the special tools. And our goal is to reduce, in a whole rotation, the frequency and intensity of tillage. So I'm going to focus in primarily on equipment approaches. I like steel, so that's where I'm going to focus. But we've done some work looking at permanent beds and strategies to also that are really appropriate to very small farms with a lot of intensive mulching. We've tried to incorporate that, but for today, in the short time that I have, I'm going to try to focus in primarily on what we've seen using different tillage tools. So in organic, we have annual strategies to reduce tillage, which would be primarily based on mulching or changing your equipment choices. And then we have multi-year strategies, would be focusing on a tillage rotation that matches your crop rotation. And the important take-home that we've had in talking with growers about this is that you have to really examine the whole system. You can't just change a tool. A couple of interesting ones that we've done a little bit of work with, and there's been work in Maine, and Lou Lego, who's here, he pioneered this hybrid mulch process in which there's plastic beds, mulch-covered beds that are maintained for multiple years with cover crops grown in between, and that reduces tillage because you're using the plastic for more than 1 year, but that's not allowable in organic anymore. You have to lift the plastic every fall. So that system ended up becoming a problem. But then permanent beds are another way because you're only doing a certain amount of tillage spatially in the field. So that's another way to look at reducing tillage. So we use 2 strategies. We've tested 2 in the past. Zone tillage, which the soil profile of disturbance is fairly shallow and narrow, 4 to 6 inches, and a band anywhere from 2 inches to 8 inches, depending on 3 offset coulters on a unit is a real common strategy, and this can be mounted on a planter in front of a planter or a separate unit. This happens to be on a fertilizer cart. And then the tool that we work the most often with is a deep zone tillage tool. The key components are a cutting disc up front to cut cover crop or crop residue, a vertical shank that's actually quite long. I think it's about 24 inches long. And you set it to run 2 inches below the compacted layer. So you have to actually go out into a field, measure the compaction, and then you set the unit up so that it's operating underneath that and breaking up that compacted layer. It's followed by a set of discs that create a nice disturbed surface area and incorporate some of the biomass on the surface, and then rolling baskets to crumble that and create a nice planting. So we've done this system using the deep zone tillage on a lot of different crops. Basically, again, our goal was dealing with compaction, and when we look at the penetration resistance in the soil, using 3 megapascals as sort of a limit for root penetration. In those systems in which we did just a really shallow zone tillage, if we go deeper in the soil, we see we hit that zone fairly shallow. But in the conventional, which had been moldboard plowed and disked, early in the season, we actually go much deeper in the soil before we hit the compacted layer. Whereas the deep zone tillage, we just don't hit it. And then if we look at the end of the season, we see that with the deep zone tillage, it's actually conserved. The drainage, the slot that we created early on, is preserved through the whole season to allow for good drainage. And for roots to forage deep in the soil for nutrients. So we worked with several, yes?
Just to have it clear in my mind, so that leaves about a 10-inch tilled strip, but then 20 inches of untilled.
Undisturbed soil in between. Yep, absolutely. So we've worked with all of these crops in New York. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah. So the penetrometer data is from the slot.
It's from that area. Yeah. Yeah. We have a really hard time getting it in between the rows.
Okay.
Well, the one thing about doing zone tillage is that you offset it 15 inches every year. So over time, the whole field is affected.
Okay.
And the amount of energy required to pull the unit is reduced after the first 2 years, just because you just opened up the ground. So we've done all of these different crops, and generally the yields are similar. We've seen yield depressions with snap beans, and then depending on the cover crop residue on the surface with cabbage for transplanted crops, but otherwise, beets and carrots, I can't do these successfully, but the growers can. And so, especially with the carrots, we've got growers in a few places in the region that are planting right over the slot, and their carrots are beautiful. So we just feel like with some time you can adapt it, and now we're looking to go into strawberries. So this is our unit. We use the Umber Earth, but I'm not committed to that particular unit. There's several other ones out there that can be purchased. The point is to have the principle of the straight shank and the finishing units. One tool that we've also built recently is using a yeoman's plow, which comes out of New Zealand. It was designed to manage moisture in pastures, in dry pastures in New Zealand, but it's got the same straight shank and tip, and so it's much lighter weight, and so we've designed this unit to be pulled by a 60 to 65 horsepower tractor. And our goal is to downscale the size of the unit to allow smaller farms to participate. You can actually buy these from market farms and build your own tool bar. Alrighty, and we've actually mounted 3 in a row, and we're working with a grower to use as those to disturb the soil prior to building a raised plastic-covered bed. So this allows him with one pass to basically lift the soil, and then he'll go through and actually shape and then cover a bed before planting. So our goal has been with organic systems to try to figure out how to incorporate cover crops into a reduced till system, with both of those being essential to optimizing soil quality. And what we face are real challenges in dealing with weeds and fertility. For obvious reasons, we're not inverting the soil. By not inverting the soil, we're not getting an optimal release of nutrients from that cover crop. We're leaving it on the surface, but we're also not adding a lot of oxygen, so our mineralization rates are probably slower. So how do we actually try to accommodate that or deal with that in a reduced system? So dealing with cover crops, the primary issues are trying to kill it early. If you're conventional, you can spray it. That's no problem. But with organic, we have to wait till it's physiologically mature before we can kill them if they're overwintering covers. That ends up resulting in a huge amount of biomass if it's brine, similar to what Sam experienced. And I have beat my head against the wall for a lot of years trying to make rye work. I don't really know why. I keep working with rye, but I do. One other thing we've done in organic is we'll cultivate, we'll undercut using a broad sweep prior to actually doing, or right after doing the zone building to help deal with some of the problems of rye, which once that rye is in between the rows, the root masses actually interferes with cultivation and other activities. Winter killed covers work awesome. Oats and peas is my all-time favorite now. It actually really performs well in the system. But one of the most important things with this is that you have to use row cleaners on your planter. There's a lot of residue. You want to have a really nice open clear zone. And so I tell growers that if you're going to do this system, you can't just buy a unit. You have to really look at your planting system as well. Planters are essential. When I looked at your planter, that was a question. There were several questions I had about how the planter was set up, because I think that could really affect seed set and your yields in that sort of roll down system. Weed management, the residue interferes in the row, and it's also a really narrow area that you're trying to cultivate, and you can catch the residue and it'll ball up and everything. And we've done all of that. We've been really good at doing that. Between the rows, you still have that residue interference, but like I said, the roots can also affect the efficiency of cultivation, because suddenly you're bringing up clumps and you're not shaking those weeds from the clumps of soil and they reroot. So fertility, because we're not incorporating, there's no inversion, and so you don't have that benefit of all of that release of nutrients for that early season boost. Our options inorganic post-planter, if you're drip irrigating, you might be able to inject something, which is sort of hard to imagine economically with the cost of different organic fertilizers, or side dressing, and we've done that using a poultry compost, where we just side dress with that. So I'm going to sort of just summarize very quickly some of the kinds of work we've done in organic. We started out doing trials where we had conventional compared to deep zone tillage, and we had 3 different cover crop combinations. We had a rye vetch, and oats and peas, and then we had oats and peas followed by intensive mulch. So we put down 3 inches of mulch with the goal of really blocking all weeds. Then in those plots where we did not have that mulch, we would apply different levels of weed management intensity, trying to minimize our time with weed management and really see how the system performed. We did with cabbage and bell peppers in rotation over several years. And so just some pictures of how it looked. You get the mulch was really amazing for holding back weeds. It also held back pepper growth really effectively. But not a surprise there because it was very cool. Cabbage thrived. And then in the different treatments, in-row weed control tended to be our biggest challenge, trying to be able to get in there and effectively and efficiently control the weeds in the row. But this is a picture of after 3 years of continuous reduced tillage in organic. This is the 3rd year, and you can see that we are not that bad with deep zone tillage compared to our conventionally plowed plots. There is some weed pressure, but it's not so much more, and the crop did just fine. So it is possible, but it just requires a rethinking of timing and how you set it. On the mulch one, that one worked really well. And in fact, where we had put the mulch over 3 years or 4 years, you could actually go into the field in the spring and you could see the area in which the mulch had been previously, because there was no weed seed deposition blowing in. We didn't disturb those, and then we just drilled our cover crop in over the top. The oats and peas were drilled across the top. And when those oats and peas died back, there was no weeds at all. And we would do a shallow disking in the spring, nothing. So mulching is really effective for preventing annual weed migration. I was really impressed with that. So yields were similar in 3 to 4 years for both of the crops. The tillage deep zone versus a conventional, no big difference. Rye veg cover crops are a pain to deal with. They always interfere with cultivation, especially in the deep zone till when they're on the surface. The mulching, as I said, reduced our yields in 3 to 4 years, and then, but it always had the fewest weeds, so it looked really nice. We just didn't get any peppers. Mechanical cultivation was effective, between the rows, but not in the row all the time. So this just requires some redesign and rethinking. And I've actually been talking with a grower who, when I showed him what I was doing, he goes, no, that won't work. So we're going to try some. We actually bought a hillside cultivator several years ago, and we're going to actually try that and no-till this year. So the bottom line really, though, I think, is that in any of these systems, to do reduced tillage and organic, you're going to have to plow at some point. Because perennial weeds, you just can't not control them effectively. We can do undercutting and sort of shallow, but we're just going to have to commit to converting the soil at some point. We actually have a bunch of conventional growers this year who decided to plow, and some of us feel like it was just a good lesson to remind them of why they're committed to zone tillage. Because once they get out there and they plow, like, oh, this really sucks. You know, I'm taking all this time and I'm using all this fuel. But in organic, we're going to probably have to commit to doing some primary plowing, over plowing. So we wanted to try to push the system a little bit, looking at how can we improve that in-row weed control, get the rye out of our way so we can get better cultivation. So I had a graduate student who she worked on a kind of interesting project in which we took the rye residue after we mowed it and we planted our peppers, and then we took some row cleaners from a Yetter row cleaners, and we mounted them backwards so they actually pushed all the rye residue into the row. And so we got in-row weed control by moving the residue into the row, but then we had we minimized the amount of rye residue that was between them. And it worked. Basically, where we had actually concentrated the rye, we had much lower weed biomass. And you can actually see it in the field. Here's where we had actually concentrated it, and it's in the row, and then our between row weed control was more effective than our in row, than where we hadn't concentrated them all. Yields, still where we had compared it to an OP that had winter killed, and that was, in 1 year we had a cold year, so there wasn't any differences, but in a drier, hotter year, the OP still out-yielded anywhere we had hairy vetch. Thomas Borkman at Cornell is doing some really interesting work with cover crops and finding the presence of the rye, even if it's killed well in advance, is depressing vegetable yields. Just the presence of it in the system. So I was thinking, it's sort of making me rethink sort of what's happening in this system. When we did a partial budget analysis of it, yes, when we looked in both years, the oats and peas had the lowest cost overall, and so this is just looking at weed management primarily is the difference in management and the seed cost. Where we had not rolled the rye, it was higher. We had a lot more time spent hand weeding in the row, and then where we rolled it in the row, we did actually reduce the whole system management. And so now we're moving, the next phase that we're in is we're trying to look at it, can we strip plant or cover crops and then zone till in between them to see if we can improve and reduce some of our management effort, improve our weed management in the row. So just another approach in organic, where we alternated different combinations of oats and peas and rye and vetch. We did it by, we just put, we had this kind of seed, a drill that we were able to put cardboard pieces in between to separate them. In the system, I'll just show you some quick pictures. Oops, going the wrong way again. So basically, in the fall, you can't tell in the spring where we've had something that winter killed like oats and peas. You just basically have the empty spaces versus having the rye vetch still growing, and then we would kill that. And then, so in a field that this was bare ground, then you can see where we zoned till what it looks like afterwards. Here's one where we had strip planted rye vetch, and you can see where we zoned till. So we're trying to basically get the residue out of the way. And improve the establishment of our crop. We worked with broccoli. The soil temperatures surprisingly weren't that different. I thought we'd see some differences, but in the first 30 days, the only difference that we really saw was between our bare ground treatments, which are the light green lines, and then when we had rye vetch in between the rows, one of the treatments. We have some more work to do with this data set, but that's the beginning. But then after we started cultivating, which happened about here, nothing. We'd done some cultivation, but really in the middle of the season, in the hottest part of the season, those decreases disappeared. As far as yields, story stays the same. Oats and peas and bare ground did better than any place we had rye vetch. Wanting to incorporate that because it's such a wonderful source of organic matter and nutrients. So we'll keep getting our head against the wall on this one. Okay, then do the other. And That's it, yeah.
When did you plant your peas and what were your rates?
Oats and peas went in the first week of September for us, and it was, I think, 2 bushels of each.
What kind of peas?
Just field peas at Wintertown. Yep.
From where did you get the yeoman flour?
Market Farm sells them. So actually, it was funny. I felt like I got, you know, that game with the monkeys that you hook up. All parts came in a barrel. So you buy them. I think when I bought them, they were about $600 for one of the shanks. But the 2-row big unit I showed you, that's at least $10,000 now. So if you can build a toolbar. You can build a unit at home, and we had growers who've done that, where they've used chisel shanks mounted, and then they get a basket unit. The important thing for the back end is to have that finishing unit, and that finished unit should float, given the soil conditions are varied.
Lauren, one more question. Yeah, so I know it's great to hear about your work. We have to travel to Saratoga. Catch up and find out what you're doing. But I'm wondering if you've considered maybe pairing the vetch with some other grass. Like
I would love
wheat
another
or
grass.
oats. And you know, Asher, I'm forgetting his last name, I'm terrible with names, that the Poughkeepsie
Spiegel.
farm? Anybody know Asher or Poughkeepsie farm? He's been working with vetch combined with rye, wheat, and oats, and kind of tweaking.
I don't know how I kill wheat in an organic system.
And well, I don't know. And he's very detailed about exactly when you want to pair vetch with those 3 other grasses.
I think the oats would be easy, and we could still kill that. But again, the reason we can kill the vetch is it's up high, we're flailing before we go into the system. And so that's one thing. We're not rolling. I don't want to roll because I want to have the freedom to cultivate any direction and plant any direction.
And you're able to let it flower, or you?
We've had no trouble with it killing in the system now. I would be